Hi everyone, Elliot Jacobson here, and the evidence is overwhelming. Yeah, today we're going to answer the first two questions posed by Judge Mitting to the experts. I'm not going to quote directly from my expert report because I do not yet know whether I can make any of that stuff public. I have some queries out. So for now, what I'm going to do is just show you the evidence. So as usual, I have a PowerPoint, so let us just get right to it. So in this PowerPoint, what I'm going to be doing is answering these two questions. Is the practice of edge sorting well known in the casino industry? And is it still actually being practiced in the casinos? So the opinion of the other side was that it was not generally well known, that in fact, in the UK, almost nobody had ever heard of it actually happening in one of their casinos prior to Ivey, and only a small handful of people even knew what edge sorting was. And what I want to demonstrate is that not just for the UK, but internationally, that is really just showing that maybe a lot of people in the surveillance industry have not been keeping up on their literature or doing their homework. I'm going to present to you a series of references and sources and quotes, and we're just going to go through some of the overwhelming evidence that edge sorting existed and was being practiced. So to begin with, I'm just going to go straight to the source, the B playing card. Now, this is not the card that was used at Crockford's, but if you notice right here in the advertisement for the B Stinger, one of the things it says is that it helps control sorter and one-way decks. In other words, why would you even fade an edge if it were not for the fact that the edges could be useful in identifying what the card is, right? So the whole idea behind a card being symmetric to begin with is that it stops any sort of identification of the card based on asymmetries. So, all right, what about this? Well, as part of my expert report, I actually contacted Donald Harrigan for a quote on his device, and he gave me four statements, and I'll just quote one of them, that the access plate stops anyone, players, from seeing the back of the first to be dealt from the dealing shoe. In other words, the whole purpose of the Harrigan brush is that we should not be able to see the back of the card. And why don't we want to see the back of the card? Well, because perhaps it's been marked and or has some asymmetry or some feature that allows us to identify what the card is. So the whole purpose of the this sort of device is to protect exactly against the sort of thing that Phil Ivey did. All right, so now let's go through some sources, and what I'm going to do is just run through a bunch of books, and we're going to start with the oldest source that I discovered. Again, I did all this research in 4 days. Just so you know, I had 4 days to write my expert report. This was the oldest source I found. This is the little pamphlet, Baccarat, Fair and Foul, by Professor Hoffman, dated 1891. And page 46. I don't want to read all of this to you, but essentially what he talks about, you can just pause the video and enlarge this and read it for yourself. Hopefully the video has good enough resolution for that. But what he's describing is the fact that the cards could be marked by the player. They could just come pre-marked, but marked cards essentially allow you to beat the game. So this is just to point out that the idea that cards being marked in some fashion as being useful to beating baccarat has been around for a long, long time. But the first source that actually mentions edge sorting in some real fashion is this book, Scarney on Cards. So this is published in 1954. And on page 23, we read, "Here's another thing you'll have to remember. Don't play with cards on whose backs are pictures or designs. When the cards are reversed, will be upside down. It seems obvious, but Edgar Allan Poe isn't the only man who knew that the more obvious a device is, the less likely it is to be discovered." So Scarney was already warning us about asymmetries back in 1954. Here we have from 1973, the very famous book Dealing with Cheats, which is a book I think everybody in the casino industry who is in game protection needs to have read. And again, you can pause this to read. Let me read a little bit. "Along the edge of the back pattern, because these variations are numerous and random in each legitimate deck, Such imperfections are of no value to the sharper. But if he buys 100 or more decks and has enough time, he can sort one deck in which the pattern edge variations will not be random. In other words, what was going on back then is they were actually using the asymmetries and creating brand new decks of cards that were using the asymmetries on the backs, essentially to allow you to identify every card in the deck by finding cards with particular patterns corresponding to their rank. So this is just instructions on how to use card asymmetries to create what was then called a sorter deck, which is not the same as edge sorting, by the way. In 1977, we have How to Detect Crooked Gambling by Frank Garcia, where he writes, these are known as sorts. If you look very closely, you will see edges have been cut so that some of the diamonds are smaller than the others. This indicates value. So yeah, way back, we already had people writing about exploiting the asymmetries. Now, probably the very first true reference to edge sorting is this very famous book on casino management by Bill Friedman. On page 44, he writes, and I do want to read this all to you because this is critical. I examined the decks for 3 hours before I found a mark that was being put on inadvertently by the manufacturer. A small diamond at one end of each card was shaped slightly differently from its counterpart at the opposite end. I put in a simple control to prevent these one-way decks from being used to cheat the house. A thief uses the one-way deck by turning the end with the defect in one direction for the big cards and the opposite direction for the small cards, right? That's what Ivey did, right? As a precaution, every time the dealer shuffled, they were required to turn the top half of the deck from one end to the other, randomizing any effort by the thief to take advantage of a one-way deck. Can you believe that? In 1982, he's talking about the necessity of having a turn in the shuffle, something that Crockford's did not have. In 1983, Stanford Wong, in one of his blackjack newsletters, wrote, examine the two ends of the back of a B card. Are they identical? In some decks they are, but in others, every card in the deck has a leading edge that is easily distinguishable from the trailing edge. So you can go on and read the rest of this if you want to pause the video, but Wong is already talking about sorting B playing cards. So this goes back a long time. In Stanford Wong's 1993 book, so no longer a newsletter, but an actual book, Blackjack Secrets, a very famous blackjack book, very large number of copies were sold. He says, examine the two ends of the back of a B card. Are they identical? Well, again, he goes on to just talk about sorting B playing cards, and you can align each card so that the back of the card has meaning to you, he concludes. All right. Garcia and Schindler in 1993, page 110, talk about one-way playing cards. So many decks of playing cards have designs, advertisements, or company logos instead of an overall pattern. If the cards are arranged with the patterns all facing in the same direction, a single card removed in reverse will stand out quite obviously. If you happen to find one of these decks, use it to your advantage. So he is talking about asymmetries on the backs of cards and how you can use that to perform magic tricks. Cheating at Blackjack by the famous Dustin Marks. He says, unfortunately, most baccarat shoes have a door that prevents the players from seeing the back of the next card to be dealt. Well, they didn't have that door at Crockford's, right? So recognizing that if you can see the back of the card, you may be able to use some information to take advantage of that. Of course, Grosjean in the year 2000 wrote about edge sorting. On page 161 of Beyond Counting, he said, in keeping with one of the themes of this book, I'd like to suggest another way to beat baccarat with information. Suppose you know the value of the first card, which will be dealt to the player hand. This information could be obtained through tracked cutting with bottom spotting, premature flashing, sequencing, edge sorting. Got it? Edge sorting. He says the words edge sorting in baccarat, not mini baccarat. Unintentional warping or cheating, among other methods. So there it is, edge sorting in the year 2000. John May, in the year 2000 and is the best book, in my opinion, purely on Baccarat. It is the only book I know of that is not filled with nonsense. Writes, an observant player can use this knowledge to his advantage if he notices the back of the card has non-uniform characteristics as it is waiting to be dealt. Note, this is not the same as playing with marked cards, which is illegal. The player is merely taking advantage of the game conditions as they are offered. So yes, he's talking about noticing defects in the cards that are already there and not put there by the player. Steve Forty on a very famous book, unfortunately not available anymore, but this is the Bible on game protection. He has 4 full pages, and this with beautiful pictures and all the information you would need. But this is a small quote from that book. Here's a very old advantage strategy, once popular with many old timers, old timers playing the turn. This is a legitimate approach for exploiting badly cut cards due to a fault in the manufacturer's cutting process that results in a back design that is off center. This manufacturer variance can be found on most cards, in particular those with an overall back design. In other words, they don't have the faded edge design. So yeah, this is right to the point that even then in 2004, he's talking about the old timers doing this, right? It had already been going on for a long time. Blackjack Ace Prediction, 2004, David McDowell, a kind of controversial book because the mathematics he presents may have there's some controversy about its accuracy, but he still writes, the card has big triangles running along the top edge and little triangles along the bottom edge. This edge is visible when the card is about to be dealt from the dealing shoe. Trackers can also use this to predict whether their first card, the dealer's whole card, or their own card will be high or low. So directly talking about edge sorting in blackjack. Advantage Play for the Casino Executive by Bill Zender. And this is more than I want to read to you right now, but I look at that. He has 5 full pages on edge sorting. So pause the video and read Bill Zender's quote there, absolutely disclosing exactly what edge sorting is to the world right there. And then he goes on, and this is with reference to the second question that was asked, is it actually happening in practice? Several years ago, a group of advantage players used sorts to attack a number of casinos' handheld blackjack games on the Las Vegas Strip. These players used a technique known as playing the turn to create a profitable sort game. So he's already saying that this was several years ago from 2006 that there were players beating casino games using sorts. My own book on page, published in 2010 on page 114, I explicitly mention edge sorting. Now, one of the best presentations of this topic is in the book Advanced Tactics in Casino Advantage Play. I highly recommend every single one of you get a copy from this. This is only available via Kindle on Amazon, but it's very cheap at $9.95. So 4 brilliant pages on this topic. And let me just read this one to you. Suppose the cards in play have a repeating diamond pattern on their backs, and suppose further that the asymmetry in the pattern consists of larger portions of the diamond closest to the edge present on one edge than on the opposite. In this case, suppose the player can either orient the big diamonds towards the top or bottom. This orientation will give the player a clue as to the card's value because she will orient all cards of certain values with big diamonds towards the top and the rest of the cards towards the bottom. So absolutely talking about edge sorting. I also, along the way, found some in-house training manuals that reference the necessity, for example, of putting a turn into the shuffle. The only purpose of a turn in a shuffle, this is the only purpose, is if the cards have an asymmetry on the back. If you don't understand what the purpose of a game protection procedure is, then it's meaningless to have that procedure. So obviously, someone at Harrah's, even back in 1967, understood this. Likewise, Harvey's Wagon Wheel on Lake Tahoe talks about having a box deck with a 1/2 turn, again, including a turn in the the game in the shuffle procedure. Now, I also, during my research, went through some of the public message boards. So here is a comment made by an Advantage player who went by the name online of Brock Windsor from March 30th, 2009. There are other legal and illegal ways to get card info. Sequencing, edge sorting, and marked card play come to mind. These require weaker, sloppy house procedures, not necessarily sloppy dealers. So here in 2009, the idea of edge sorting was already very well known and in the public domain on message boards. Likewise, I had my blog, AP Heat, and in a post after the Ivey case came to public light, this post was made. And I just want to read the first sentence of this to you, and then you can read the rest of this on your own if you want. And he says, this is just an extension of a system used successfully in the early 60s. In other words, this has been around for a long time, and people have known about this for a long time. So here is my pre-Ivey stuff. You can see that I have a number of articles here. It's in the card from Table Talk in 2006, A Turn of the Cards, Raving Solutions, early 2012. I was a keynote speaker at the World Game Protection Conference in February of 2012. I gave an invited talk at the International Association of Casino Security in May 2012, where I talked about edge sorting. I have 2 articles that appeared on my blog, AP Heat, prior to the Ivey case becoming public knowledge. Now, what I want to do is just take you to my website. And again, the point of showing this to you is that a lot of the material I presented here right now is available to you. You don't need my access to my expert report to get this. Just go over to AP Heat and edge sorting and look at this very first article, a few historic references on edge sorting. And if you go down here, I have listed 17 references. And for most of these, I give you actually a scan of the reference material so you can look at the full content, not just the little excerpts that I put here. So for example, if we were to go to Blackjack Secrets by Stanford Wong and click on this, you can see that I have more material printed here. So you are welcome and invited to do some more exploration on this topic on your own. All right, well, that is what we presented as the answers to questions 1 and 2, at least in part. I had more on there that I don't feel comfortable presenting in this video, but yeah, that was all part of that 4 days. But then came question number 3. Is edge sorting considered by the casino industry to be contrary to the rules of baccarat and or to be cheating? Or is it considered to be a legitimate gambling technique? Well, again, I want to ask, how would you answer this question? How would you answer this question? I'll tell you how I would have liked to answer it. I would have liked to put out a survey using the best and most sophisticated survey tools I could find, distribute that survey to casinos throughout the UK and internationally, and collect as much data as I possibly could, and then do all the graphs and figure out all the conclusions that I could make, and really have a beautiful presentation of the answer to this question. Because what do I know about the casino industry's opinion of this? All I know is that when I asked people, everybody thought it was fair play, right? I got away with it. We're not going to, everybody did, right? Until they were under some pressure where their answer would become public and they were representing their own company or corporation. So yeah, I am not sure I'm going to be able to present what I did on this. We'll have to wait for the sort of freedom of information issue to be addressed before I can even tell you what I did here. So, all right, everybody. Hey, look, what I'd love you to do is subscribe to this channel. Just go on right down there, subscribe to this channel. And that would be, it would be nice for me, all right? I'm trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers, because YouTube makes a lot of things available once you hit 1,000. And I just passed 500. And so, hey, I'm halfway there. So as long as this pandemic continues, I will continue to make these videos. And I would appreciate your support, and the support you can give me is just by clicking on that subscribe down there. So, all right, everyone, that's all I have to say for today. This is Elliot Jacobson. See you later.